The Great Senate Hall of the Galactic Concord was the largest room ever built by any living species. It stretched so far in every direction that the far walls disappeared into a soft blue glow. Thousands of seats rose in rings around a central platform, and in those seats sat the representatives of over 4,000 species from across the known galaxy. Some were tall and made of something like stone. Some floated in liquid tanks. Some were so small that they needed mechanical suits just to be seen. But all of them were watching the same thing, a recording that played on the central platform, projected in light and sound for everyone to hear. It was a message from Earth. The voice belonged to a human woman. She spoke calmly, but there was something underneath her words, something raw and shaking, like a wire pulled too tight. She explained the situation in simple terms. A dead piece of a neutron star, a chunk of collapsed matter so dense that a single spoonful of it weighed more than a mountain, was moving through space on a path that would bring it directly into their solar system. When it arrived, it would not just hit Earth, it would tear apart the gravity of every planet nearby. Everything in the inner solar system would be pulled apart, crushed, or thrown into the sun. She said they had 14 months. She said they had no way to stop it alone. She said they were asking, not begging, but asking for help. In return, they offered everything: their culture, their biological data, their labor, their loyalty, anything. The recording ended. The Senate Hall was silent for a long moment. Then the arguments began. Ambassador Yorin, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms, who ran the First Contact Bureau, stood at the center and opened the floor for discussion. He already knew how this would go. He had read the reports. Earth was a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous categories of planet that could still support life. Its gravity was crushing. Its atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive that it corroded metal and fed fire. The creatures that lived on Earth had evolved by eating each other. Every animal on that planet was either a predator, something that ran from predators, or both at the same time. And the humans were the worst of all. They were persistence predators. They did not chase their prey with speed. They simply followed it, walking, jogging, for hours or even days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They had built weapons out of splitting atoms. They had spent most of their history fighting each other. Their emotional responses were so intense that they could become irrational, violent, or self-destructive without warning. The Veltari were the first to speak against helping. Their ambassador, a creature that looked like a tower of dark green crystal, presented data models that showed Death World species caused instability in 73% of cases where they were uplifted or aided by galactic civilizations. The numbers were clear. Helping Earth was a risk to everyone. The Dren Collective agreed. So did the Marath Federation. So did the Singing Clouds of Pelinar, who rarely agreed with anyone about anything. One by one, species rose and gave their reasons. Some were afraid. Some were practical. Some simply did not care. Earth was far away, on the edge of a quiet arm of the galaxy. It had no resources worth fighting over. Its people were unknown and unproven. And the cost of helping, the ships, the energy, the engineering, was enormous. The vote was called. The result was overwhelming. The Galactic Concord would not help Earth. Ambassador Yorin read the result aloud, and as he did, one small light blinked on at the far edge of the Senate Hall. It was the signal that someone wished to speak. Yorin looked at it for a moment, then nodded. The speaker was Cathari, the representative of the Velori. The Velori were not a powerful species. They were small, no taller than a human child, with delicate, insect-like bodies and 4 thin wings that folded along their backs. Their skin was pale and slightly translucent, and beneath it Soft light moved in patterns. They glowed. It was how they expressed emotion. Bright meant joy. Dim meant sorrow. A rapid pulse meant fear. They came from a low-gravity world made of crystal and mist, and they were known across the Concord as scholars, healers, and record-keepers. They had no war fleet. They were, by most standards, one of the least important species in the Senate. Cathari stood on the platform. Their glow was steady, a calm, warm blue. "We were dying once," Cathari said. Their voice was soft, translated by the chamber's systems into every language at once. "Our sun was failing. We had no ships fast enough to escape. We sent a message into the dark, and we waited, and someone answered. They came. They helped us. They asked nothing in return. That is why we are still here." The Senate was quiet. "I have listened today," Cathari continued. "I have heard many reasons not to help this world. They are dangerous. They are violent. They are unknown. All of this may be true. But I remember what it felt like to scream into silence. I remember what it felt like when someone finally answered." Cathari looked around the chamber. "We will not let them scream alone." The vote from the Valori was the only one in favor. It changed nothing in the official record. The Concord's decision stood. But the Valori did not need the Concord's permission. Back on their own ships, Cathari called an internal vote. Every Valori in the fleet, scientists, medics, engineers, archivists, was asked a single question. Should they go to Earth, alone, against the Concord's advice, with no guarantee of success and every chance of failure? The vote was unanimous. They would go. The Valori had one deep-core mining vessel, the Luminarch. It was old, but powerful. They had a small fleet of medical and science ships. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough. But they went anyway. As the Luminarch pulled away from the Concord station and turned toward the distant yellow star that humans called the sun, Cathari stood at the viewport and watched the station shrink behind them. Beside them, their aide, a young Valori named Selith, held a data tablet and read from the human file. "It says they are emotionally volatile," Selith said quietly. "Tribal, and irrationally bonded to one another." Cathari's wings fluttered, a sign of unease. "Then let us hope," Cathari said, "that they are bonded to us as well." The stars stretched, and the Luminarch jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying the only help Earth would ever receive toward a world no one else thought was worth saving. The Valori fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Sol system, and the first thing Cathari noticed was the light. Their home star was a gentle, pale thing, soft and cool. The human sun was an angry ball of white-gold fire that flooded every sensor on the ship. Even through filtered viewports, it was too bright. Selith flinched and looked away. "How do they live so close to that?" Selith asked. No one on the bridge had an answer. As the fleet moved inward, past the giant outer planets, past the belt of rocks and ice, past the red planet with its thin dead air, Earth came into view. It was blue and white and green, swirling with thick clouds, and it was beautiful in a way that also felt deeply wrong. The Valori could see the oceans, vast amounts of liquid water that covered most of the surface. They could detect the oxygen in the atmosphere, a gas that burned Valori tissue on contact. They could measure the gravity, and when the number appeared on the screen, the bridge went quiet. Earth's gravity was nearly 3 times that of the Valori homeworld. Walking on the surface would feel like carrying 2 copies of yourself on your back. This was a death world, and they had come to save it. The humans were waiting for them. A fleet of small, rough-looking ships came out to meet them. Nothing like the smooth, elegant Valori vessels. Human ships were blocky, covered in panels and bolts, trailing exhaust and radio noise. They were loud in every sense of the word. But they formed a neat escort formation and guided the Valori fleet into orbit. And every channel was filled with the same message, repeated in dozens of human languages. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Welcome. Cathari and a small team went down to the surface in a shuttle. They wore full environmental suits, sealed against the oxygen, reinforced against the gravity, filtered against the light. Even inside the suits, every step on Earth's surface was exhausting. The ground felt like it was trying to pull them down into itself. The air outside the suit, if they could have breathed it, would have burned their lungs. The sounds were overwhelming. Wind, birds, machines, voices, all at once, all the time. And then the humans came to greet them. They were enormous. Not by galactic standards, the Valthari were far taller. But to the small, fragile Valori, humans were giants. They moved with a heavy, confident grace that came from living their whole lives under crushing gravity. Their bodies were dense with muscle and bone. Their skin came in dozens of different colors, and they smiled, pulling back their lips to show their teeth, white and flat and strong. On every other world Cathari had visited, showing teeth was a threat. Here, it meant happiness. The human delegation was led by a woman named General Marin Solvik. She was not young. Her face was lined, and a scar ran from her left ear to her jaw. Her hair was short and gray. She moved like someone who had spent a lifetime carrying heavy things, and had decided she did not mind. She reached out her hand toward Cathari, a human greeting, they had been told, and Cathari carefully placed their small glowing fingers into her palm. Solvik's hand was warm and rough, and closed gently around theirs. "Thank you," Solvik said. Her voice was steady. "Thank you for coming when no one else would." Cathari's glow brightened. "We are here," they said. "Show us the problem." The problem was worse than anyone had thought. Valori engineers spent 3 days scanning the neutron shard from orbit, and the results made Cathari's light go dim. The shard was denser and more massive than Earth's instruments had been able to measure. It was not just going to pass through the solar system. It was going to tear the inner planets apart with its gravity alone, long before any physical impact. The timeline was shorter, too. They had less time than they had believed. The only option the Valori could see was to use the Luminarch. The great mining ship carried a singularity core, a tiny contained black hole that powered its systems. If they overloaded the core in a controlled way, they could generate a massive gravitational pulse, strong enough to push the shard off its path. But doing so would destroy the Luminarch completely. The ship would be gone. Their most important vessel, the pride of their fleet, reduced to dust and light. Cathari presented this plan to General Solvik and the human leadership in a long, quiet meeting held in a concrete building surrounded by tall trees. When Cathari finished speaking, they expected agreement. They expected the humans to accept the sacrifice with gratitude and move forward. Instead, Solvik said no. "Absolutely not," she said. "You came here to save us. We are not going to let you destroy yourselves doing it." Cathari did not understand. "There is no other option," they said. "Then we will make one," Solvik replied. And the humans did something the Valori had never seen before. They argued, they shouted, they pulled scientists and engineers from every country on their planet. People who normally refused to work together. People whose nations were rivals. People who spoke different languages and followed different beliefs. And they put them all in the same rooms and told them to solve the problem. The humans worked in shifts. When one group collapsed from exhaustion, another took over. They ate at their desks. They filled walls with equations and diagrams, and then tore them down and started again. And in 3 weeks, they had an answer. It was not elegant. It was not clean. A young human engineer named Priya Chandakar stood in front of the Joint Command and explained it with dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on her shirt. Instead of destroying the Luminarch, They would use it at partial power, enough to generate a gravitational pulse, but not enough to deflect the shard alone. The missing energy would come from somewhere else. It would come from Earth's nuclear weapons. Every warhead on the planet, thousands of them, built over decades of fear and conflict, would be launched into space and detonated in a precise sequence, timed to amplify the Luminarch's pulse. The combined force would be enough. Barely. The math was tight. The margins were thin. One mistake would mean failure. But it could work. The Valori engineers stared at the calculations. They were not wrong. The plan was brutal, crude, and dangerous, but it was not wrong. Seleth leaned close to Cathari. They want to use their own weapons of destruction to save themselves, they whispered. Is that not poetic? Cathari did not answer. They were watching the humans, the way they moved, the way they talked over each other, the way they clapped each other on the back and laughed, even though they were terrified. A human child had visited the Valori quarters the day before and given Seleth a drawing made with colored wax sticks. It showed small glowing figures with wings, standing next to tall figures with big smiles, and above them all, a yellow sun. Seleth had not put the drawing down since. After the briefing, Cathari found General Solvik standing outside, looking up at the sky. The stars were just coming out. General, Cathari said, may I ask you something? Anything. You have had them for a very long time. They are your most powerful tools of war, and you are giving them up without hesitation. Why? Solvik was quiet for a moment. Then she looked down at the small, glowing being beside her and smiled, teeth showing, warm and wide. We have been looking for a good enough reason to get rid of those things for 100 years, she said. You just gave us one. Above them, the stars burned. Somewhere out in the dark, the neutron shard was getting closer. And on the ground, two species, one ancient and gentle, one young and fierce, began building something together that neither could have built alone. They called it Operation Gratitude. The name was chosen by a committee of humans and Valori together, and both sides agreed it was right. What they were about to do was not just a military operation or a scientific experiment. It was a thank you, written in fire and mathematics and aimed at the stars. 40 days before the neutron shard was expected to reach Earth's solar system, every space-capable vehicle on the planet launched at once. It was not a beautiful sight, not in the way the Valori understood beauty. The ships that rose from Earth's surface were ugly, mismatched things. Old cargo shuttles patched with new metal. Satellites pulled from orbit and bolted onto frames that had been welded together in parking lots and airfields. Research vessels, never designed to carry weapons, now loaded with nuclear warheads, strapped into their cargo holds with cables and clamps. One ship had been a tourist shuttle 2 months ago. Now, it carried enough destructive power to flatten a city. But they flew. Every single one of them flew. From orbit, the Valori fleet watched them rise. Hundreds of points of light, climbing out of the blue atmosphere like sparks from a fire. Seleth stood at the sensor station on the Luminarch's bridge and counted them. 312 human vessels. Some had crews of 20. Some had crews of 2. All of them were heading toward the same point in space, a spot 200,000 kilometers from Earth, where the warheads would be placed in a precise formation, waiting for the Luminarch's gravitational pulse to trigger them in sequence. The Valori fleet guided them in. Human navigation was rough compared to Valori systems, so every human ship was paired with a Valori signal beacon that told them exactly where to go and when to stop. The two fleets moved together like two hands weaving a net, one made of crystal and light, the other made of iron and stubbornness. For 3 weeks, everything went according to plan. The warheads were placed. The formation was checked and double-checked. The Luminarch's singularity core began its warm-up cycle. A slow, careful process that made the old ship groan and vibrate deep in its bones. Cathari stood on the bridge and felt it through the floor, a low hum that said the ship was gathering everything it had for one final effort. Then the shard changed. The Valori long-range sensors picked it up first. The neutron shard was spinning, rotating on an axis they had not predicted. And as it spun, its gravitational pull shifted. The effect was small in absolute terms, but enormous in practical ones. The shard was arriving 6 days earlier than planned. The Luminarch's core needed 12 more days to reach full charge. Panic spread through both fleets. On the human channels, voices rose in argument and fear. On the Valori channels, there was a deep, flickering silence, the glow of every crew member dimming at once. Cathari gripped the edge of the command console and forced their lights steady. "Options," Cathari said. The chief engineer, a Valori named Dorath, answered with numbers that were not good. The core could fire at partial charge, but the pulse would be weaker. They would need more from the warheads to make up the difference. That meant a tighter detonation sequence, more precise timing, smaller margins for error. If even a few warheads fired late, the whole operation would fail. Cathari sent a message to General Solvik on the flagship of the human fleet. Solvik's response came back in seconds. "We adjust. We don't quit." The plan was rewritten in hours. Human and Valori mathematicians worked side by side, some in the same room, some across thousands of kilometers of space, connected by communication beams. The new sequence was tighter, more dangerous, and required every warhead to detonate within a window of 0.2 of a second. Priya Chandakar, the young engineer who had designed the original plan, said it was like threading a needle while riding a horse during an earthquake. Then she laughed and went back to work. Cathari ordered all non-essential Valori personnel to evacuate to safe distance. Shuttles began pulling back from the formation. But the humans did not leave. Not one. Cathari sent the order again, this time directly to General Solvik. "All human ships should withdraw to minimum safe distance," Cathari said. "Only automated systems are needed for the final detonation." Solvik's voice came back, calm and warm. "Our ships don't have the automation for this kind of precision. Someone has to fly them in by hand. My people volunteered. All of them. They will be exposed to extreme radiation," Cathari said. "They know. Some of them will die. They know that too." Cathari's glow went very dim. They did not argue further. The day came. The neutron shard appeared on sensors as a dark point against the stars, something that bent light around itself, a hole in the shape of a fist. It was moving fast, and it was pulling at everything around it. The outer planets shifted slightly in their orbits. Moons wobbled. The human ships in formation rattled and groaned as tidal forces tugged at their hulls. The Luminarch fired. Its singularity core screamed. There was no other word for the sound it made, even in the silence of space. The ship's entire frame twisted as the energy poured out in a single directed pulse, a wave of gravitational force that rippled outward toward the formation of warheads. The detonation sequence began. Warhead after warhead lit up in a chain of white fire, each explosion catching the gravitational wave and pushing it forward, harder, stronger, faster. From a distance, it looked like a string of pearls made of stars, flashing one after another in a line that stretched across the dark. But one ship was not in position. A guidance system had failed on a small human shuttle carrying 3 warheads, 3 that were critical to the middle of the sequence. Without them, there would be a gap. The chain would break. The pulse would scatter. Captain David Osei was flying the next shuttle in line. He was a tall man with a shaved head and steady hands, who had been a cargo pilot before any of this began. He heard the failure alarm. And he did the math in his head, the way humans did, fast and rough, and close enough. He turned his shuttle out of formation and flew it into the gap. His crew shouted at him. The radiation in that zone was already lethal. His shields were not rated for it. He would be dead in minutes. He knew all of this. He told his crew to seal themselves in the shielded rear compartment. And then he flew the shuttle by hand into the exact position needed, holding it steady against the tidal forces with nothing but his own skill and the ship's straining engines. On the Valori medical ship, a young medic named Tirith watched Captain Osei's vital signs on a screen. Heart rate, elevated but steady. Blood oxygen, dropping. Radiation exposure, climbing past every survivable limit. Tirith's glow flickered with distress, tears of light running down their face. There was nothing they could do. Osei's warheads fired on time. The chain held. In his final minutes, as the radiation ate through his body, David Osei opened his communications channel and began to hum. It was a simple melody, something slow and gentle, a lullaby his daughter had taught him before he left. It played across every frequency, human and Valori alike. On the Luminarch's bridge, Cathari listened and did not move. On the medical ship, Tirith pressed their hands against the screen and wept light. The song ended. The vital signs went flat. Captain David Osei was gone. But the shard was moving. Slowly, so slowly that at first no one was sure. The neutron shard began to turn. The gravitational pulse, amplified by thousands of nuclear detonations, pushed against it like a hand against a boulder. It was not enough to stop it, but it was enough to turn it. Degree by degree, the shard's path bent. It curved away from the inner solar system, away from Earth, away from the sun, and began to slide toward the empty void beyond. The Luminarch shuddered and went dark. Its core was cracked, its systems fused together by the strain. It would never fly again. 2 Valori escort ships had been caught in the radiation wash and were destroyed. 11 human pilots were dead, including Osei. Dozens more were injured. But Earth was still there. The blue planet turned in its orbit, untouched, alive. For 60 seconds, every radio on Earth went silent. Every station, every channel, every device, nothing but quiet. The Valori did not understand. Seleth checked the sensors and found no malfunction. The silence was deliberate. Then the music started. Not one song, but thousands, rising from every corner of the planet in hundreds of languages, playing all at once. Some were fast and joyful. Some were slow and sad. All of them were loud, and all of them were real, and they filled every frequency like a flood of sound. Cathari stood on the dark bridge of the broken Luminarch and listened. "What are they doing?" Cathari whispered. Seleth checked the translation matrix and looked up with wide, glowing eyes. "Celebrating," Seleth said. "And mourning. Apparently humans do both at the same time." The Valori did not leave after the shard was gone. They could not. The Luminarch was dead, its core cracked, its engines fused, its great body drifting in orbit like a sleeping whale. The smaller ships needed repairs that would take months. So the Valori stayed, and the humans took care of them, and that was when the strange things began to happen. It started with letters. The first one arrived on a supply shuttle 3 days after the deflection. It was a single sheet of paper, folded in half, written by hand in large, uneven letters. It was from a child, in a place called Brazil. The translation software struggled with it because the child had misspelled several words, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you for saving us. I drew you a picture. You are very pretty when you glow. I am 7. Inside the folded paper was a drawing done in bright colors. Small winged figures standing next to a big blue circle, that was probably Earth, with a yellow sun overhead and a lot of hearts. Seleth held the letter carefully, as if it were made of glass, and placed it on a shelf in the communications room. The next day, 40 more letters arrived. The day after that, 300. By the end of the first week, the Valori flagship was receiving over 10,000 letters a day. They came from everywhere, from schools, hospitals, military bases, retirement homes, prisons, churches, temples. They came from children who could barely write and from old people whose hands shook so badly that the words were almost impossible to read. They came in every human language. Some were long and some were short. Some were funny. Some made the Valori crew cry with light. Seelith was given a team to process them. The team grew from 5 to 40 to 100, and still they could not keep up. They read every single one. Then the monuments began. No one told the humans to build them. No government issued an order. No committee made a plan. It simply happened, the way things happened with humans. Suddenly, everywhere, all at once. In 12 different countries, people began building things to honor the Valori. But they were not the kind of monuments the Valori expected. There were no statues of warriors or leaders. Instead, there were gardens, planted with flowers that glowed in the dark, bred or engineered to mimic the soft light of Valori skin. In a city called Tokyo, an entire building was covered in panels that pulsed with light every evening, cycling through the patterns that Valori used to say hello. In a country called Kenya, a field of crystal pillars was raised on a hilltop, each one carved with the name of a Valori crew member. When the wind blew through them, they made a sound like singing. Kethari received reports about each new monument and did not know what to say. Then the names began. It was Seelith who noticed it first, buried in a data report from Earth's global communications network. In the month after the deflection, over 4,000 human babies had been given Valori names. Some were named Keth. Some were named Kethari, or Kethara, or Kethan. Some were named Seelith, or Dorath, or Tirith. Human parents were naming their children after the alien crew members who had come to save their world. When Seelith told Kethari this, the old Valori did not speak for a long time. Their glow shifted through colors that had no name, something between joy and grief, and a feeling that the Valori language had no word for, because they had never needed one before. Then came the food. The Valori could not eat human food. Their bodies could not process most Earth proteins. But within weeks, human scientists and chefs began working together to create meals that Valori could safely eat. And not just safe meals, but beautiful ones. A famous chef in a city called Paris spent 3 weeks designing a 12-course meal specifically for Kethari, using ingredients grown in controlled environments to match Valori nutritional needs. Each dish was a work of art. Each one was flavored with compounds that the chef had learned were pleasant to Valori senses. When Kethari ate the meal, they said it was the most wonderful thing they had ever tasted in their very long life. The chef cried. Humans, Kethari had learned, cried when they were happy too. But the thing that truly broke the Valori, the thing that none of them were prepared for, was the music. A group of human musicians from many different countries came together and composed a single piece of music. It was a symphony, a long, complex piece played by a full orchestra of human instruments. But woven into the music were frequencies that no human ear could hear. The musicians had studied Valori biology and learned that the Valori could sense harmonic vibrations that were far above the range of human hearing. These frequencies were the ones that Valori used to express their deepest emotions: love, kinship, belonging. The humans could not hear these sounds themselves. They had put them in the music anyway. When the light that came was performed live for the first time and broadcast to the Valori fleet in orbit, every Valori who heard it lost control of their bioluminescence. Their bodies blazed with light, waves of color that pulsed and flowed without any conscious direction. It was the Valori equivalent of weeping with joy in front of everyone. Some of them sank to the floor. Some of them held each other. All of them glowed so brightly that the interior of every ship looked like the inside of a star. On the bridge of the flagship, Cathari stood alone and let the light pour out of them and did not try to stop it. But there was one more thing, one final gesture that Cathari would carry for the rest of their life. General Marin Solvik came to the flagship in person. She rode a shuttle up from the surface, still wearing her uniform, still carrying herself with that heavy, steady strength that Cathari had come to admire. She was escorted to the bridge, and she carried something in her hands, a piece of fabric, folded into a neat triangle. It was a flag, Captain David Osei's flag. In human military tradition, when a soldier died, their flag was given to their family. And then his daughter, a girl named Abena, 14 years old, had asked General Solvik to carry it back up to the Valori fleet. Solvik held the flag out to Cathari. "His daughter asked me to give this to you," Solvik said. Her voice was rough and tight, the way human voices got when they were trying not to cry. She said, "You are family now." Cathari's glow dimmed to almost nothing, the deepest possible expression of being moved beyond words, beyond light, beyond anything the Valori had a name for. They reached out slowly and took the flag. It was warm from Solvik's hands. Then, for the first time in the history of contact between their species, Cathari reached further and placed their small, glowing hand on top of Solvik's rough, human one. The bridge went silent. Human and Valori crew stood together and watched. Someone started to cry, a human sound, wet and broken and real. Then someone else joined. Then everyone did, in their own way, humans with tears, Valori with light. That night, alone in their quarters, Cathari opened their personal journal and recorded a single entry. "We came to save a species. We expected, if anything, a transaction, resources, a treaty, a political alliance. What we received instead was love, indiscriminate, overwhelming, terrifying love. They do not express gratitude as a formality. They restructure their entire world around it. They name their children after you. They learn your language. They compose music in frequencies they cannot even hear, simply because you can. I understand now why the Concord fears them. It is not because humans are violent. It is because when they love you, they do so with the same intensity with which they wage war. And that is the most powerful force in the galaxy." Outside the viewport, Earth turned slowly, blue and white and green, wrapped in clouds, humming with music. And then a new message arrived. It was not from Earth. It was from the Galactic Concord. They had been watching. 1 year after the neutron shard was turned away from Earth, the Galactic Concord called a special session. Every species was summoned. Every seat was filled. The great Senate Hall buzzed with voices and signals and chemical messages and light pulses. 4,000 species talking at once about the same thing. Earth. The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and the delegation walked in. Cathari entered first, their glow brighter and steadier than anyone in the Senate had ever seen. Their wings were spread slightly, not in fear, not in display, but in the Valori posture of absolute calm certainty. Beside them walked General Marin Solvik, her gray hair cut short, her uniform pressed clean, her boots making solid sounds on the stone floor. Behind them came a small group of human diplomats, scientists, and artists. And at the back, walking with her shoulders straight and her father's eyes, was Abena Osei. She was 15 now. She had asked to come, and no one had been able to tell her no. The Senate watched them cross the floor in silence. Some species leaned forward. Some pulled back. The Valthari ambassador, tall and rigid in their crystal body, stood completely still. Cathari and Solvik took their places at the central platform. The lights adjusted. The translation systems hummed. And then, before Cathari could speak, something happened that no one expected. Ambassador Yorin of the First Contact Bureau stood and addressed the chamber. "Before we begin," he said, his silver face unreadable, "the Concord wishes to present its findings." A data display activated behind him. It showed charts, graphs, timelines, all focused on the Valori. And what the data showed was remarkable. In the single year since the Valori had helped Earth, their civilization had changed. Valori technology had jumped forward by decades. Human engineers, working alongside Valori scientists, had solved problems that the Valori had struggled with for centuries. The humans thought differently. They were messy, creative, willing to try things that should not work, and somehow make them work anyway. The result was a wave of new inventions, better medical tools, faster communication systems, stronger ship designs. Valori medicine had been transformed by studying human biology. The human immune system, a brutal, aggressive thing that fought off diseases by essentially waging a tiny war inside the body, had given Valori doctors new ideas about how to treat illnesses that had plagued their species for generations. 3 diseases that had been considered incurable now had treatments. And Valori culture was experiencing something that their own historians were calling a renaissance. Human art, music, and storytelling had poured into Valori society like water into dry ground. Valori artists were creating works that blended the two traditions. Delicate light sculptures set to human rhythms, stories told in patterns of glow that followed human narrative structures. It was new. It was alive. It was unlike anything the Valori had produced in 1,000 years. The data was clear. The Valori had not just survived their encounter with humanity. They had grown stronger because of it. They were thriving. The Senate murmured. This was not what the models had predicted. The Dren Collective Statistical Analysis had said that contact with Deathworld species led to instability. The Veltari had warned of contamination, of aggression, of chaos. None of that had happened. Instead, something no one had thought to model for had occurred. The humans had made the Valori better. Cathari stepped to the speaking platform. 1 year ago, Cathari said, I stood in this chamber and told you that we would not let the humans scream alone. Many of you thought we were foolish. Some of you thought we were throwing our lives away. I understand why. The data said we were wrong. The models said it was dangerous. Everything you knew told you to stay away. Cathari paused. Their glow rippled. But data does not know what it feels like to be helped. Models cannot measure what happens when someone shows up for you when no one else will. We went to Earth with almost nothing. We went knowing we might fail. And what we found there was not what any of us expected. Cathari looked at General Solvik, who stood beside them with her hands clasped behind her back and her jaw set firm. We found a species that does not know how to give up, a species that will argue with each other for hours and then sit down and share food, a species that names its children after strangers who help them, a species that writes music in frequencies it cannot hear, simply because someone else can. We found a species whose gratitude is not a word or a gesture but a force, as powerful and as unstoppable as anything in the universe. Cathari straightened. I am here today to formally request the admission of Earth into the Galactic Concord. The chamber erupted. Voices rose from every section, some in support, some in shock, some in anger. The Velthari ambassadors stood and raised an arm for silence. This is exactly what we warned against, the Velthari said. Their voice was like stone, grinding on stone. The humans are a death world species. They are aggressive, emotional, and unpredictable. They have a history of violence against their own kind. Allowing them into the Concord is an unacceptable risk. The Velthari turned to face the human delegation. What guarantee do we have that you will not turn that aggression outward? That you will not become a threat to us all? The chamber went quiet. Every eye and sensor turned to the humans. Ketharai looked at General Solvik and gave a small nod. Solvik stepped forward. She was not tall by galactic standards. She was not impressive in any physical sense compared to the towering Velthari or the massive Dren. She was just a woman, old, scarred, tired, who had spent a year learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than her own world. She looked up at the Velthari ambassador. "You are afraid of what we will do if you threaten us," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the silent chamber like a stone dropped into still water. "You should be more afraid of what we will do if you are kind to us." Nobody spoke. The Velthari's crystal body was perfectly still. "You saw what we did for the Velori," Solvik continued. "One species helped us. One. And we gave them everything we had. We gave them our weapons, our creativity, our music, our children's names, our futures. We did not do this because of a treaty or a trade agreement. We did it because that is what we do. When someone stands with us, we stand with them, forever, with everything we have. That is not a threat. That is a promise." She paused. "Now imagine what we would do for 4,000 species." The vote was held that afternoon. It was not unanimous. The Velthari voted against. So did the Dren Collective and a handful of others. But the margin was wide. Earth was admitted to the Galactic Concord. After the vote, as delegations began to move around the chamber, some approaching the humans nervously, some eagerly, some simply watching from a distance, a small figure separated from the human group and walked across the floor toward the Velthari ambassador. It was Abina Osei. She was small and young and completely unafraid. She stopped in front of the towering crystal being and looked up. The Velthari looked down. Around them, conversations paused. People turned to watch. Abena held out her hand. In it was a small object, a bracelet, woven from colored thread in a pattern of dark greens and deep blues. The Velthari ambassador stared at it. Those were their ceremonial colors. This human child had researched their culture before coming here. She had made this by hand. "My dad always said you start friendships with a gift," Abena said. The Velthari's rigid body shifted, plates of crystal sliding against each other, in a way that, for their species, expressed pure shock. For a long moment, they did not move. Then slowly, very slowly, they extended a limb and took the bracelet from Abena's hand. But they held it carefully, the way Seleth had held that first drawing from a child in Brazil, like something precious, like something that could change the shape of the world. Later, as the delegations returned to their ships and the Senate Hall began to empty, Kethari stood at a viewport on the Concord station. Outside, the stars burned in their ancient patterns. A human shuttle and a Vylori light skimmer flew in formation past the window, moving in perfect harmony, one ship dark and angular, the other bright and smooth, both heading in the same direction. Seleth came to stand beside Kethari. "Do you think we made a mistake?" Seleth asked. Their voice was quiet, the way it always was when they were thinking deeply. Kethari watched the two ships disappear into the dark together. Their wings spread wide, the Vylori posture that meant certainty, that meant peace, that meant home. "I think we made a family." Below them, on the station's public broadcast frequency, someone had started playing The Light That Came. The music drifted through the corridors and common rooms of the station, carried by speakers and vibrations and the hum of metal walls. A Dren analyst paused in a hallway to listen. A Velthari merchant stopped in a market and tilted their crystal head, the bracelet still wrapped carefully around their limb. A group of Morath children pressed their faces against a window and watched a human woman wave at them from the other side, and show her teeth in a smile. The music played, the light spread, and across the galaxy, slowly, one species at a time, the silence that Earth had screamed into began to fill with something new. Not fear, not suspicion, not the cold calculations of data and risk. Something the Vialori had known all along, and the humans had carried inside them, like a fire waiting for fuel. And the rest of the galaxy was only just beginning to understand. It did not have a perfect translation in any galactic language. But in every human tongue, it had always had the same name: